All right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here today and to share some of the thoughts from IoT and smart cities from the city perspective. My name is Tony Batalla. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the city of San Leandro, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area, just south of Oakland. We're a population of 90,000 residents, and I'm certainly happy to share some of the work we've done as well as some of the work I've done in the larger smart city space. So I'll jump right in. I'm going to cover some work that I did, as I mentioned, in the more global space on with NIST, with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, in their working group called the Global City Teams Challenge. And there we authored a blueprint called the Municipal IoT Blueprint, which was published in 2018. And I want to look at some of the results there that we came up with, some of the findings, and then we can discuss, how we look 3 years later in 2021 and maybe where we go from here. So that's kind of the overall context. So first and foremost, IoT in smart cities, of course, has tremendous promise. And I don't think that comes as any shock or secret to any of us. We all know the benefits that could come from IoT deployments. So everything from enhanced service delivery to reducing your operating costs to sustainability. You think of air quality monitors and equitable access, building them out into parts of the city that maybe historically had been digitally underserved. Your improvement of economy, things of beacons and helping local shops sell to residents and tourists. So all these tremendous benefits, all these promises are out there. This promise of benefits that in some cases have been realized, and in some cases, as we'll see, are still developing. So this is a model. On the right here, you'll see a model of what an IoT network looks like typically in a city. So in fact, San Leandro, we've developed something like this for our smart streetlight network. We have 4,800 streetlights that are connected with Wi-Fi gateways. It's about 35 gateways, and then that connects into our municipal fiber network for the backhaul. And that's a pretty common kind of a design. What we uncovered in our research was these different business models. And so there's the build and own, where the city really funds it. It's like a capital improvement project, and they fund it and they own it. Typically, we'll contract with construction firms and technology firms to build it, but at the end, they'll own it. And then there's a subscription model, which is more of where we're moving kind of with 5G, where IoT plans would be purchased right alongside of cellular plans, and you could then plug in. And of course, there's pros and cons to each one. But some of the other considerations for smart city IoT are security. Obviously, you create a new vector, and you don't want that to be something that people are able to hack into and get into your crown jewels of your system. So that's top of mind, I think, for everyone would be cybersecurity. But regionalization is another one, right? Smart cities shouldn't end within the municipal border. So, working regionally through maybe county level type of builds or other regional government organizations where the systems maybe are standardized across borders or they're interoperable. So if we have a smart traffic system, street intelligent traffic signals, they don't end if you're on the thoroughfare. And as soon as you get to the other city, you lose that benefit. But this other one, civic engagement and privacy, is more and more prevalent, more and more important. And it's come up in the real world very recently, and I'll mention that as well. And finally, you have the framework you need to think about. So moving on, I want to go into some survey results, and these will come straight from the research that we did. So back in 2018, we had 37 responses, which is a low sample size, I'll give you. But these are government officials working in, department head level, cabinet level type of positions. And back then, some 90% said, we see IoT having a significant impact, right? So that's not a shock, but it does validate that there's a market there. There's something out there. There's a there, right? And we asked, well, what do you see it impacting? And you see the top results here are street lights, 78%, transportation, 72%, public safety, 72%, and utilities, 75%. So those are the overwhelming. But really across the board, there's a belief that IoT devices and IoT networks and the data and systems associated would be transformative across all of these domains. That's a lot, though. And that's another thing I want to touch on later is the diversity of city operations and how distinct these different functions really are, which poses a problem for creating smart city solutions. But anyway, so we see that there's this belief that there will be a big impact. Again, promise of smart city, promise of IoT, the promise that these benefits might be realized. So when we asked, what's your current phase? Well, now we start to see where we really are. And so 63% were just in a consideration phase, right? Hadn't even actually done anything. 18% had done pilots, right? And these are typical for cities to do. They minimize the risk. There's not a lot of money that needs to be put out. It may not have top level support. This is something that can usually be driven by a department head or a senior manager within their own budget, within their own team, just experimenting. And only 9% were in some sort of a project phase. Now, again, this is 2018, so these numbers are probably a little different now, but if you were to ask me to bet, I'd say not much different. Because when we asked them, when do you think this will really happen? The majority, nearly 60%, said 2022 and beyond. So this is another important takeaway here is the timescale that governments operate on, right? The timescale, I'm going to slide over here a little bit so both my hands are in the screen, is long. Right? We operate on really long schedules, which is different than what maybe technology vendors are used to, right? So that's an adaptation that vendors have to understand coming into the smart cities. It's not going to happen fast. This is a slow transformation. So 2022 and beyond. So let's plot that. So if we were to plot that, right, this what you're looking at here is called the Rogers Diffusion of Innovation Curve. And Rogers was a researcher that came up with this, when he looked at technologies and said, based on how they are adopted in the market, you have these innovators, early adopters, and then you get to the majority. Now, for a vendor, early majority, late majority, that's where all the money is, right? That's where you actually make money. In the early adopters phase, you don't really make a lot of money, right? This is still where you're finding that product market fit. And what Rogers came to identify was something called the chasm, and that's that red triangle there where you have to cross the chasm to go from the early adopter to the early majority. And once you get into the majority, now we're like sailing, right? Now we're going to make some money. But you have to cross that chasm somehow. And that involves finding the product market fit and all these other things. We're not there. So that's what the research shows us is we're still smack in the innovator early adopter phase with municipal IoT. Now this was in 2018, but even here in 2021, I don't think it's much different. Again, working on a large time scale. So this is one of the key takeaways is that we're still in this early adopter phase and we still haven't crossed the chasm yet. We don't know what it's going to take or what it's going to look like when we do cross the chasm, but we can say we haven't crossed it yet. So some of the key findings in our research then was, these IoT projects tended to break along different lines. You had pilot projects and then production projects. The pilot projects, again, were about containing risk, experimentation. They used lots of different technologies, cellular IoT, LoRaWAN, NB-IoT, et cetera. The challenge there was scaling one, finding something that worked and then scaling it. So the challenge was about growth. Whereas with the production, the challenges were more about the ongoing phase, the maintenance. How do we coordinate across all the different city departments? How do we get buy-in and now get an ROI on this big capital expenditure that we've made? And we only found a few examples of cities that had made a big capital expenditure on an IoT project. And in fact, I'll touch on one in just a second here. So this brings us to today, the here and now, and where we are. And so this past year had some really interesting events. So Google Sidewalk famously was working on a smart city. They were going to build the city in Toronto, a waterfront in Toronto. It wasn't actually in Toronto; it was just outside of Toronto. But they exited that. They walked away from it. I know there was tremendous privacy issues there. There was a lot of pushback, and they ultimately walked away from that project. So that analysis commentary held, but just know that that project did end. Meanwhile, Cisco exited. Again, let me slide in here. Exited the smart city market, which was a Wall Street Journal article, which caught a lot of attention. Cisco has since said, no, we didn't actually exit it. We just dropped this Kinetic project. But that is still significant nonetheless, because Cisco was so in the front of creating the vision of smart cities that for them to exit that product, even though it is just a product line, nonetheless is telling about what that vision, whether or not that vision came to materialize. So City of San Diego is the other one I wanted to discuss. We did study this in our work in 2018. They have since halted the deployment of their IoT network, and it's largely due to pushback around privacy issues and the community itself saying, no, we're not ready for this. And so San Diego had to put in place policies, use policies, how they're going to use these cameras, particularly cameras that are used in public safety. And with the events of 2020, with public safety and police departments, that's only going to continue. So that's kind of where we are. We have not found the product market fit. The technology itself has not matured to meet these disparate needs. Trying to build one platform that serves all cities' functions, from police to library to economic development and administration, is very, very difficult, and perhaps not the way that smart cities will evolve. Yet there are some things that are happening, digital twins, and within these certain domains that do have promise. So that's kind of where we are. It takes us from where we were then to where we are now. And we can jump into a quick Q&A, and I'd love to take maybe some questions. I'm gonna do another plug for the blueprint to go download that. There was a lot of work put into that, but I believe we have some time. So
We do. How you doing?
all right.
Yeah. So I covered the Kinetic decision by Cisco, and they're going to support the software, but they're not going to continue to sell it. And that is a big change, especially because I think 6 years ago I was in Kansas City, and they were going to basically create a manager of managers for this city, with a big dashboard, and I think they ran up against so many of the things you mentioned, privacy, but the other thing is that they changed mayors. And there was an election, and the mayor that got installed is probably doing a fine job. I really don't know much. I'm not there anymore. Used to live there, but he wanted to focus more on the neighborhoods and neighborhood needs, and it was all about building affordable housing and those kinds of concerns. So I mean, how dead is the smart city movement, I guess, is the real question.
Yeah, no, I think it's a provocative way of saying our smart city's dead, but it's in kind of the the ashes of projects like that did not materialize. I think there's a couple of things there. One, like I said, Cisco, it's more symbolic, but nonetheless significant, because they had done so much to define what smart cities were, and that vision of a smart city is so much based on the marketing that they had put together. But when they tried to sell that vision back to cities, as it turned out, cities didn't buy it. So that vision may be dead. And perhaps the next chapter will be more defined. The vision will be more defined by cities themselves. So that's one takeaway. I think the other one is you definitely highlight political pressure. This is a political environment. And so the pressure is working in a political environment. And, you have a new administration and your priorities change. But nonetheless, that's another thing I think is smart cities aren't going to solve our most vexing, challenging issues. Homelessness, income inequality, those sorts of things are so much beyond technology. And it's good to take a step back and say, let's let technology do what it does well and not expect it to be some kind of, salve that's going to just fix the most vexing social issues. And then the one I mentioned about trying to have a dashboard or a system that works across these different functions is really hard. We've tried to do similar work in San Leandro, and I can say that those functions are so disparate. I mean, they're their own fiefdoms, really, that it's very hard to create a system that will work across a library and a police department and an economic development team. I think there will be winners within those certain domains that emerge.
That's really great. Just so we're not ending on a complete Debbie Downer, do you see the Biden administration with maybe a national infrastructure plan, sort of revitalizing the movement? I know it's instead of smart cities, it might be smart communities or smart regions.
Yeah, and that is, you are correct. The term smart cities has always been a little bit, it's kind of pejorative in the sense like, what do you mean we weren't smart before? Like it's kind of
Yeah, yeah.
so it's never really stuck for city folks themselves. And that might be part of the problem. So, but under the Biden administration, I think certainly there's hope that the Department of Transportation always had big initiatives. They had big grant funding and things like that. If they get behind it and there's funding available and they can classify technology under infrastructure, that could unleash. You see that actually with a lot of the COVID relief plans was there was more progress made on digital divide last year. Cities that were able to build out public Wi-Fi systems and connect so many, particularly students, and it was all because the federal government, turned on the faucet, and so these
Well,
cities that for years had plans finally were able to go out and execute. And I think that's a testament to those cities, and it's a testament to how quick they can execute if you give them, the funding. So certainly there's a hope for that
very good.
this isn't the
Hey,
end; it's
thanks.
an evolution.
Thanks a lot, Tony. That's really great. Appreciate your trouble.
Yeah, no, it was great to be here, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Matt.